Chapter 4 of the History and Literature of the Early Church. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The History and Literature of the Early Church by James Orr. Gentile Christianity, Nero to Domitian, A.D. 64 to 96. The indications in the New Testament of a rapid progress of the gospel are filled out by traditions of the labors of the apostles after their dispersion from Jerusalem. Thomas in Parthia, Thaddeus in Edessa, Andrew in Scythia, etc. Often untrustworthy, but in their main features bearing out an early extensive diffusion of Christianity throughout the countries of the known world. Corroboration will be found in the facts now recited. 1. First contact with the empire. The world has rarely seen more perfect specimens of human wickedness than in the series of emperors who succeeded Augustus. The dark, unrelenting Tiberius Gibbon was followed by the mad Caligula, and he by the dull, sottish Claudius, A.D. 41, to whose reign belongs the first distinct notice we have of the presence of Christianity in the empire. The historian Suetonius relates that Claudius banished from Rome all Jews who were continually making disturbances at the instigation of one Christus. This is the banishment referred to in Acts chapter 18, verse 2, A.D. 52. There is little doubt that Christus is a misspelt name of Christ, and that what Suetonius alludes to is tumults in the Jewish quarters which had arisen through the preaching of Christ. This is 6 years before the Epistle to the Romans, A.D. 58, and shows how remarkably Christianity had already spread in the capital. Cf. Romans chapter 1, verse 8, and Tacitus below. In A.D. 54, Claudius was poisoned to make way for his stepson Nero, in whom every vice that tongue can name seemed concentrated. Under Nero happened what is usually reckoned as the first persecution, though this mode of enumerating persecutions is in many ways misleading. 2. The persecution under Nero. One night, A.D. 64, Rome was discovered to have been set on fire by an unseen hand. The fire spread with terrible rapidity till 10 out of 14 quarters of the city were destroyed. Popular suspicion fastened this crime on Nero, and he, to avert odium from himself, turned it on the Christians. A frightful persecution ensued. An immense multitude were convicted, not so much, as Tacitus confesses, on evidence of having set the city on fire, as on account of their hatred of the human race. To the most exquisite tortures were added mockery and derision. Some were covered with the skins of wild beasts and thrown to be devoured by dogs. Others were crucified, numbers were burnt alive, and many, covered with pitch, were lighted up when the day declined to serve as torches during the night. Footnote: At the stakes they shine who stand with throat transfixed and smoke and burn. Juvenal. End of footnote. The emperor lent his own gardens for the spectacle and heightened the gaiety of the occasion by games. The persecution was local, but so terrible an event occurring in the capital could not but have the most serious consequences affecting the status and treatment of Christians in the provinces. Cf. 1 Peter and Apocalypse. Apart from its inherent pathos, the persecution yields instructive light on the rapidly growing numbers of the new sect and on the estimate in which they were held by the pagans. When even an intelligent writer like Tacitus can speak of them as universally detested and deservedly punished for their crimes, and of their religion as a pernicious superstition, it is easy to imagine how the ignorant and unreasoning crowd must have thought and felt regarding them. It was not only into the lower strata of society, however, that Christianity had penetrated. We have at least one interesting case in this reign to show that it had found its way into higher circles as well. Tacitus relates that in A.D. 57 a very distinguished lady, Pomponia Graecina, wife of Aulus Plautius, commander of the army in Britain, was accused before her relatives of having adopted a foreign superstition, which led her into habits of seclusion and melancholy. This foreign superstition has been generally understood to be Christianity, and the discovery of a crypt in the catacombs connected with the Pomponian gens, one descendant bearing this very name, Pomponius Graecinus, puts the matter beyond doubt. 3. Martyrdom of St. Paul and St. Peter. To this reign of Nero, according to the concurrent testimony of antiquity, belong the martyrdoms of the two great apostles, St. Paul and St. Peter. That St. Paul suffered at Rome, having carried the gospel to the extreme limit of the West, is attested by Clement, A.D. 96, and is indeed evidenced by his own latest epistle, 2 Timothy, which anticipates a speedy death by the sword of the executioner. Clement's language favors the supposition that he did not meet this fate at the end of the imprisonment recorded in Acts chapter 28, verses 30 and 31, but had a new period of activity, journeying perhaps as far as Spain. Cf. Romans chapter 15, verse 28. His second imprisonment is probably to be regarded as an after effect of the terrible persecution already described. His trial seems to have had two stages. He himself writes pathetically that at his first answer or defense he could get no one to act as his patron or advocate. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16. A testimony to the general terror Nero's recent acts had inspired. He suffered, tradition says, on the Ostian Road, probably A.D. 67 or 68. To the same period must be assigned the martyrdom of his brother apostle, St. Peter. The fiction of St. Peter's 7 years episcopate at Antioch and 25 years episcopate at Rome, source in the Clementines and in apocryphal Acts, may be disregarded. On the other hand, there is a consensus of testimony to the fact that St. Peter came to Rome in the end of his life, and suffered martyrdom about the same time as St. Paul. This we may accept as the historical nucleus round which embellishments of legend subsequently gathered. The story of St. Peter desiring to be crucified with his head downwards is first found in Origen, beginning of 3rd century. Most beautiful of the legends about St. Peter is the well-known Quo Vadis story, 4th or 5th century. Peter was fleeing from the city when he met the Lord carrying his cross. "Lord," he asked, "whither goest thou?" "I go to Rome," said Jesus, "to be crucified again." Smitten with the rebuke, St. Peter turned back to prison and to death. 4. The Empire till Domitian. From Nero to Domitian, the next emperor who concerns us is 13 years, AD 68 to 81. In this short interval, no fewer than 5 emperors were raised to the purple. The reigns of 3 of them, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, were compressed in the brief span of 18 months. Vespasian and Titus were good rulers. Their names are connected with the Jewish war and the destruction of Jerusalem. On the death of Titus, AD 81, not without suspicion of poison, the empire was taken by Domitian, Vespasian's younger son. Historians say he took Tiberius for his model. His moroseness, dissimulation, cruelty of disposition are dwelt on by all who speak of him. Under him took place what is customary to call the second persecution. 5. The persecution under Domitian. Domitian began as a precisian, but ere long developed qualities which made him what Pliny calls the enemy of all good men. His rapacity and lust of blood found a fitting prey in the Christians. Clement, AD 96, speaks of a vast multitude of the elect who suffered for Christ and gives vivid glimpses of the indignities they endured. An interesting story is told by Hegesippus of 2 grandchildren of Jude, the brother of the Lord, whom Domitian caused to be brought before him, but dismissed as simpletons on finding that they had no money and expected only a celestial kingdom. A more remarkable instance in every way is that of Flavius Clemens, the consul, and his wife Domitilla, who, the heathen historian Dion Cassius informs us, were in this reign, AD 96, accused of atheism and going after the customs of the Jews. These 2 persons were of the highest rank. Clemens was the cousin, Domitilla the niece of the emperor, and their 2 sons had been adopted by Domitian as his heirs. Yet Clemens was put to death, and his wife was banished to an island in the Aegean. The peculiarity of the charge implies Christianity, and this is now confirmed by the discovery of the cemetery of Domitilla in the catacombs. So near even in that early age had Christianity come to the throne of the Caesars. Dion further relates that many others were put to death or had their goods confiscated on the same charge, and instances Acilius Glabrio, who had been consul with Trajan, and whose family was one of the most illustrious in the state. In 1888, the crypt of the Glabriones in the catacombs was likewise laid bare by De Rossi. Other discoveries show that Christianity had penetrated deeply into the family of the Flavians. 6. Last days of St. John. To this reign also, if the oldest witnesses are to be trusted, is to be referred the banishment of the Apostle John to Patmos. Footnote. Tacitus tells us with evident reference to this reign that the islands were filled with exiles and the rocks stained with murder. Histories, Part 1, Chapter 2. End of footnote. And the composition of the Apocalypse. It is in any case to the period after Nero we must assign St. John's removal to Asia Minor and his labors in teaching in Ephesus, of which there is ample attestation. Here, surrounded by a circle of friends and disciples, he continued to an extreme old age, his residence broken only by the banishment above mentioned. Among those about him in his latter days we have notices of the apostles Philip and Andrew, of Polycarp, of a second John the elder, and of other elders who continued his tradition. Ephesus, in short, in the closing years of the century, became the new center of the Church, as Jerusalem had been earlier, and Rome was to be later. As St. John grew old, tradition relates, his friends gathered round him and besought him to write down what he had taught about Christ. Thus his gospel originated. There seem to have been 2 editions of it, if we may judge from the supplementary chapter 21, itself attested by a note from the elders, verses 24 and 25. Many beautiful stories remain to us of St. John's later days, how, for instance, when too weak to repair to church, he caused the young men to carry him thither, and being unable to speak much, contented himself with saying, "Little children, love one another," Jerome, or the fine story told by Clement of Alexandria of his reclaiming the young man who had become a robber. St. John's life is said to have extended into the reign of Trajan, i.e. beyond A.D. 98. His tomb was shown in Ephesus. 7. The Catacombs. Reference has been made to the catacombs. These singular excavations are immense subterranean burial places of the early Christians in the fields around Rome, near the great roads, within a circle of 3 miles from the city. They began in the 1st century, probably as private burial places in the vineyards or gardens of the wealthier converts. The older cemeteries, which formed the nucleus of the catacombs, can in this way in several instances be distinguished. These smaller burial places, as the excavations proceeded, ran into each other and formed the larger areas. The extent of the catacombs is enormous. They consist of a vast maze or labyrinth of passages, often in descending levels, intersecting each other in all directions, with little rooms or vaults on either side. The total length of the passages is reckoned at some 587 geographical miles. These corridors with the accompanying chambers are literally packed with graves. The number of the dead interred in them has been variously estimated, but can hardly be less than 2 million. This fact speaks volumes for the extent to which Christianity had spread in and around Rome during the 3 centuries or thereabouts that the catacombs were in use. The oldest cemeteries, as those of Lucina, Pomponian, of Domitilla, of Priscilla, etc., are distinguished by their architectural elegance and classical style of decoration. Special interest attaches to the art features, symbols, and inscriptions of the catacombs. They make large use of painting. The oldest tombs exhibit this art in its highest perfection. Afterwards, painting becomes conventional, and often, as in the pictures which stand for Noah in the ark, Jonah and the fish, etc., sinks well nigh to the ridiculous. The biblical representations embrace scenes from both Old and New Testaments. The figure of the Good Shepherd appears from the very first, and there are early representations of baptism and the Lord's Supper. The symbols of the catacombs bear striking testimony to the circle of ideas in which the Christian mind moved, and to the hopes by which it was sustained. They are of all kinds, from rudest scrawls to carefully executed designs. Most were biblical, a few pagan, Orpheus, etc. Favorite symbols were the anchor, the dove, the lamb, the ship, the palm, the crown. The cross is not early. Chief among emblems, on account of its mystical significance, was the fish. It finds its explanation in the fact that the letters of the Greek name Ichthus stand for the first letters of the names of Christ, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, Savior. Like the symbols, the inscriptions are often rude in style, but show also how differently death and everything connected with it was looked upon in Christian as compared with pagan circles. The inscriptions are marked by a rare simplicity, often no more than "in peace," but breathe always the spirit of hope, trust, and charity towards others. There is about them nothing horrible or revengeful. The tools of labor are portrayed, but not the instruments of torture. They speak to the power that overcomes death. The catacombs were long lost to knowledge, were rediscovered by Bosio in 1578, and were carefully explored in the last century by De Rossi and his coadjutors. Points for inquiry and study. Read Suetonius and Tacitus on Nero and Domitian, Tacitus on Domitian in Life of Agricola. Test the grounds of St. Peter's alleged Roman episcopate, cf. Barrow's Supremacy. Illustrate from the New Testament the penetration by the gospel of the upper ranks. Collect the legends of the later life of St. John, cf. Godet. Read Browning's Death in the Desert. Study further the testimony of the catacombs. Books. On the History, Merivale's Romans Under the Empire, Farrar's Early Days of Christianity and Story, Darkness and Dawn, Lightfoot, as above, on the later school of St. John in Essays, Lancini's Pagan and Christian Rome, Northcote and Brownlow's Roma Soterranea, Withrow's Catacombs, Orr's Neglected Factors in the Study of the Early Progress of Christianity, deals with numerical progress, spread of Christianity in higher circles, etc. Harnack's Expansion of Christianity. End of chapter 4.